Potter story from another's perspective. Rowan Barrows and the Forgotten Prophecy, Chapter 6, The Hogwarts Express. Rowan had barely slept. For the past 2 weeks he had packed and repacked his trunk every night, checking his school list so many times the parchment had begun to crease at the folds. His robes had been folded, shaken out, and folded again. His books had been stacked, unstacked, and arranged in order of importance. Even his father's battered old owl cage had been scrubbed until Sebastian looked at him, as though to say he'd quite lost his mind. And now, at last, the morning had come. Downstairs, Eleanor was fussing over the state of his robes. "They're creased already, boy. Honestly, you'll look like you've slept in a haystack before you've even got there." While Mrs. Ashford was trying to look calm and failing rather spectacularly, she kept setting Rowan's toast down, forgetting about it, and then handing him another slice 5 minutes later, as though the first had vanished into thin air. Candy had decided he wasn't going to let Rowan leave without a fight. The old cat had squeezed himself into Rowan's trunk the moment it was opened, glaring at anyone who tried to shift him. When Rowan finally coaxed him out, Candy sulked beneath the table, tail flicking in irritation. Eleanor reached across the table and patted Rowan's hand. "Keep your chin up, Ro," she said, her eyes twinkling beneath the shadow of her shawl. "You'll do us proud, no matter what." Mrs. Ashford pursed her lips at that, but didn't argue. She was too busy glaring at the fireplace, from which a faint grumbling noise was beginning to emerge. With a loud whoosh of emerald fire, Mr. Barrows stumbled into the kitchen, brushing soot from his sleeves. "You're late," Mrs. Ashford said immediately. "Good morning to you too, Mags," Mr. Barrows replied, straightening his tie and giving Rowan a wink. Rowan grinned despite himself, his stomach fluttering with nerves and excitement. "Don't you dare track ash on my clean floor," Mrs. Ashford snapped, though she looked more anxious than angry. "I'll keep my feet off it then," Mr. Barrows said cheerfully, though he was already leaving a faint trail of footprints behind him. He clapped Rowan on the shoulder. "Ready, lad?" Rowan nodded so quickly his hair flopped into his eyes. Mrs. Ashford bent to brush his hair out of his eyes, then paused, her hand lingering. "Be safe, and make sure you write," she said softly. "I will," Rowan promised, though he wasn't quite sure what safe meant in a castle full of magic. Eleanor sniffed. "Of course he will. He's my grandson." She gave Rowan's father a pointed look. "And you'll see he gets there in one piece, won't you?" "As if I'd ever do otherwise," Mr. Barrows said, though he avoided his mother's eyes. Then, with a brisk clap of his hands, he turned to Rowan. "Hold tight." Rowan barely had time to take one last look at his mother's worried face before the flames swallowed him. Rowan stumbled out of the grate at King's Cross, coughing as soot billowed into the air. His father caught him by the elbow and brushed off his shoulder with quick, distracted pats. "Stand up straight, lad," his father muttered, already scanning the station clock. "We've cut it fine." The vast glass roof of King's Cross stretched overhead, sunlight spilling in hazy shafts through the smoke of trains and the clamour of travellers. Muggles bustled past with suitcases and newspapers, entirely unaware of the students with owl cages and trunks struggling to keep pace with their parents. Rowan clutched the handle of his trunk, trying to keep up as Mr. Barrows strode purposefully between the platforms. "How do we—" Rowan began. His father raised a hand. "Watch, it's simple." They stopped between platforms 9 and 10. A hurried-looking witch with a toddler in tow marched briskly toward the barrier and, to Rowan's astonishment, vanished straight through it, trolley and all. Rowan's eyes widened. "Don't gawk," his father said, glancing over his shoulder. "People will notice." He grinned then, a flash of his old mischief. "Just walk straight on. Best not to think about it." Rowan tightened his grip on his trolley and pushed forward, his heart hammering. For one dreadful second he thought he was about to crash headlong into the solid brick wall. And then the world bent, blurred, and he was stumbling out the other side into clouds of white steam and the shriek of an engine whistle. The Hogwarts Express gleamed before him, a long scarlet train stretching across the platform. The air was thick with the hoots of owls, the hiss of escaping steam, and the chatter of families saying goodbye. Rowan stared, awestruck, as Mr. Barrows wheeled his trolley to the side. "There it is," his father said, clapping him once on the back. "Off you go, lad, and remember, keep your head down and don't get yourself expelled in the first week." Rowan laughed nervously, though his stomach twisted. "Write to me," his father added, softer this time. "I will," Rowan promised. A whistle blew, sharp and urgent. Students clambered aboard, trunks thudding, cats yowling in their baskets. Rowan hugged his father quickly, then turned and hauled his trunk up the steps. Inside, the narrow corridor was already crammed with students jostling for compartments. Rowan dragged his trunk along, peering in at each door. The first compartment he passed held a pale-haired boy surrounded by two hulking lads, who looked more like bodyguards than friends. Rowan recognised the sneer instantly. Draco Malfoy. He remembered his father's warning and walked quickly on. Another compartment was filled with chatter. A dark-haired boy with glasses sat opposite a red-haired boy. Every compartment seemed full until, near the end of the train, he found one with only 2 people inside. Rowan slid the door open. A boy about his age sat sprawled across the seat, lanky and dark-haired, idly flipping through a deck of cards that fizzed faintly at the edges. Opposite him sat a girl with bushy brown hair and rather large front teeth, her nose buried in a thick book titled The Standard Book of Spells, Grade 1. The boy looked up, grinned, and gestured to the empty space beside him. "Not taken," he said, "unless you're secretly a banshee, in which case I call window seat." Rowan blinked, then laughed despite himself. He hauled his trunk in and sat down. "I'm Rowan." "Ollie," the boy replied, tucking the cards away. "You can relax. I don't bite." The girl looked up from her book, her expression brisk. "Hermione Granger," she said, as though ticking her name off a list. Then, after a small pause, "Nice to meet you." Rowan smiled politely, unsure what else to say. They hadn't been talking long when the door slid open again. A round-faced boy stood there, looking close to tears. "Sorry," he said nervously. "Have you seen a toad anywhere?" Rowan blinked. "A toad?" "He's called Trevor," the boy said miserably. "Gran said I should keep an eye on him, but he keeps hopping away." Ollie leaned sideways to peer under the seats. "Afraid we're toadless in here." The boy sighed, shoulders slumping. "Right. Thanks anyway." "I'm Neville, by the way. Neville Longbottom." "Rowan Barrows," Rowan said. "Ollie Pennington," Ollie added with a small salute. Neville lingered a moment longer, clearly hoping the toad might magically appear if he waited long enough. Before he could turn away, a sharp voice spoke from inside the compartment. "A toad? You've lost a toad?" The bushy-haired girl, Hermione, had finally lifted her head from her book and noticed what everyone was talking about. "Well, we'll have to find it then, won't we?" she said firmly. Neville brightened instantly. "You will?" "Of course," she said, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. Ollie gave her an exaggerated bow from his seat. "Hermione Granger, professional toad detective." Hermione frowned at him. "Honestly, if you're not going to help, you could at least try not to be ridiculous." Rowan coughed to hide a laugh. Neville gave them all a hopeful look. "I'll check the next carriage," he said quickly. Hermione nodded briskly. "I'll come with you." She stood sharply and marched off down the corridor beside Neville, already peering beneath the seats as she went. The compartment door slid shut again. Ollie leaned back in his seat, looking rather relieved. "Ah," he sighed. "Finally, I could almost hear her reading." They had barely settled back into their seats when the door slid open again. A pair of chattering second-years poked their heads in, whispering far too loudly to really be whispering. "Did you hear? He's on the train," one of them said, eyes wide. "The boy who lived," the other breathed, as though saying it too loudly might conjure him out of thin air. "Harry Potter!" Rowan straightened in his seat, exchanging a quick glance with Ollie. "Harry Potter?" Rowan repeated, leaning forward. "You mean he's really here?" "Course he is," the first girl said eagerly. My brother saw him get on at King's Cross. Black hair, glasses, scar and everything. Reckon everyone will be queuing up just to shake his hand." Ollie grinned, shaking his head. "Imagine that. First day at school and you've already got a fan club." The second years kept muttering excitedly in the corridor. "Do you think he's nice? I mean, what if he doesn't want all that attention?" Rowan hadn't thought of that. He remembered what his father had said, "Leave the boy be." Then he imagined being the one everyone whispered about before you'd even set foot in the castle. His stomach twisted. It sounded terrifying. "Still," Ollie said, leaning back with a dreamy sort of sigh, "it'd be brilliant to be famous. Never any trouble-making friends. Or enemies," Rowan pointed out quietly. Rowan glanced out the window, watching the rolling countryside give way to darkening skies and tall trees. Somewhere on this train was Harry Potter, real, alive, and on his way to Hogwarts. The train rattled on, fields and villages giving way to hills and shadowy woodland. Conversation came in bursts, Ollie making wild guesses about what house he'd be sorted into, and Rowan mostly staring out the window, nerves twisting tighter with every mile. Ollie was stretched across the seat with the sprawling confidence of someone who'd been waiting all his life for this moment. "Right," he said, fishing a battered, scorch-marked deck from his pocket. "Now that we've survived the dreaded Toad Detective, it's time for something educational," Rowan blinked. "Educational?" Ollie beamed. "Exploding snap." Rowan eyed the cards warily. The edges fizzed, sparked faintly, and one corner appeared to be gently smoking. Should they be doing that? Ollie shuffled the deck, or tried to. One card twitched violently, emitting a crackle, and leapt out of his hands like a chocolate frog. Rowan flinched. "They always do that," Ollie said cheerfully, slapping it back into the pile. "Means they're in a good mood," Rowan gulped. Do they explode often?" "Not often," Ollie said. "Only when you lose." Rowan couldn't decide whether Ollie was joking or not. Ollie cleared his throat dramatically. Lesson 1, reflexes. Lesson 2, bravery. Lesson 3, don't let go unless you enjoy being singed. He dealt the cards between himself and Rowan. A few of Rowan's let out disgruntled hissing noises as they landed. "Right," he said. "When two cards of the same picture show up, you slap the pile like this." He thumped the cards with such force the compartment shook. Rowan's eyebrows shot up. "Won't that make them explode faster?" "Exactly," Ollie said proudly, as if Rowan had passed a test. They began the game. Ollie flipped cards rapidly, his eyes sharp, his hands quicker than Rowan would have guessed. Rowan tried to keep up. Knights swinging clubs, bubbling cauldrons, hopping rabbits, portraits that winked between turns. Suddenly, crack! Two identical cards appeared. Rowan slapped the deck instinctively. It snapped upward, popping loudly like a firecracker and emitting a puff of violet smoke. Rowan jerked his hand back, shaking out the sting. Ollie whooped. "Excellent! Beginner's burn!" Rowan coughed through the sweet-smelling smoke, eyes watering, but a laugh broke out of him anyway. "Does the game always attack you?" The next round went better. Rowan got the hang of watching the cards, hands hovering over the deck, heart thudding with each flip. When he slapped correctly again, faster this time, the cards simply fizzed and emitted a shower of harmless sparks. "See," Ollie said smugly. "You're a natural." Rowan grinned, rubbing his still tingling fingers. When the train finally screeched to a halt, Rowan jolted upright. His heart gave a thump as he looked out and saw only darkness beyond the glass. Mist curled over the platform, lanterns swinging in the night breeze. Fur's years over here," a booming voice called. Rowan craned his neck and nearly fell back. The man standing by the platform was enormous. Lantern light caught on a shaggy beard, broad shoulders, and a voice that carried like thunder as he waved his arm. He's enormous," Ollie whispered, eyes wide. The crowd of first years clustered together, trailing after Hagrid like ducklings as he led them down a sloping path. The night air was cool, sharp with the scent of pine and lake water. "No more'n 4 to a boat," Hagrid bellowed as they rounded a corner. Rowan stopped dead. Spread before them, black as ink and glistening under the stars, was the lake, and at its shore dozens of little boats bobbed at the water's edge waiting for them. Rowan climbed in with Ollie and a dark-haired girl, clutching the edge as the boat rocked beneath his feet. Another boy squeezed in at the last moment, grinning nervously. "Thistlebrook Thorns, right?" the boy said suddenly to Rowan, recognition lighting up his face. "I've seen you play." Rowan blinked at him in surprise, but before he could answer, Hagrid's booming voice cut across the water. "Forward!" Rowan could only stare. Across the ink-black lake, rising from the mist like something pulled from a dream, stood Hogwarts Castle, vast and ancient, its towers spearing up into the night. Hundreds of windows burned gold against the darkness, winking through the drifting fog like watchful eyes. High turrets pierced the clouds, banners fluttered faintly from the ramparts, their colours shifting in the torchlight. Somewhere far above, an owl wheeled through the air, wings glinting silver before vanishing into the stars. The chatter hushed to whispers, the only sound the soft splash of water as they drew closer and closer to the looming castle. Rowan's heart hammered in his chest, his eyes fixed on the glowing windows ahead. Rowan's chest tightened. He'd seen sketches in books at his father's house, and once, a moving photograph in an old Daily Prophet clipping. He'd listened to Eleanor's stories about the feasts and corridors and the staircases that never stood still. But nothing, not words, not drawings, not even his own late-night imaginings, had prepared him for this. Every stone of it shimmered with possibility. The reflections of the towers quivered on the black water, broken by the ripple of the boats gliding forward. Lantern light slid across the surface like spilled gold. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Ollie breathed beside him. Rowan could only nod. His throat felt tight, and a strange warmth stirred somewhere behind his ribs, the kind of feeling you got when you realised you were standing exactly where you were meant to be. A gentle wind carried the smell of pine and damp stone. The faint toll of a bell drifted across the water. As they drew closer, Rowan could make out ivy trailing down the outer walls and the shadow of an enormous front gate. When the boats curved toward the landing beneath the castle, the water lapped softly against the rocks, and Rowan caught sight of flickering torches along the stairs that wound upward into the entrance hall. Each flame leapt higher as if in greeting. The castle loomed above them now, proud, old, and somehow kind. As they neared the cliffs, the black water gave way to drifting ivy that hung thick over the stone. The boat slowed, gliding beneath the trailing vines. Water dripped from the leaves, cool against Rowan's neck. For a moment, the sound of the world vanished. Only the hush of dripping water and the faint pulse of their lanterns remained. Then, one by one, the boat slipped through an archway in the rock. A narrow tunnel mouth, hidden behind the ivy. The air changed at once. It grew cooler, echoing softly with the sound of lapping water. The walls glimmered with faint veins of quartz, catching the lantern light in silver flashes. Rowan craned his neck, heart thudding as the tunnel widened, until suddenly the space opened up into a vast underground harbour. Dozens of boats floated there, their lanterns bobbing like fireflies in the dark. The cavern roof arched high above, dripping with stalactites. A stone landing jutted out from the base of the cliff, lit by torches that burned gold. "Steady now," Hagrid called, hauling his own boat in first with a splash of his boots. "Out you get. Watch your step, it's slippery." "Oi, you there, is this your toad?" Rowan overheard Hagrid say. Then a blissful cry from Neville came following. Ollie leaned toward Rowan, muttering under his breath, "I'm not surprised he lost that toad. It's a wonder the thing doesn't hop off out of embarrassment." Rowan tried, and failed not to grin. Rowan climbed out, his heart hammering, the smell of wet stone filling his nose. "Keeper of keys, that's me," Hagrid was saying cheerfully to a nearby student who'd asked what he did at Hogwarts. He thumped the ring of keys at his belt. It clanked like a bag of iron bones. "Got more keys than I know what to do with. Half of 'em I've no idea what they open. Old castle like this, she's full of secrets, you know." The climb was steeper than Rowan expected. The stone steps wound upward through the cliffside, slick with moss and shining faintly in the torchlight. Each footstep echoed off the walls, mingling with the drip of water from somewhere deep above. The air smelled of stone and rain, sharp and ancient. They emerged onto a wide stone platform high above the lake. Mist rose from the water below, curling around the cliff edge, and the night air rushed in cool and clean. The torches lining the path sputtered in the wind, their light catching on the great shadow that loomed before them. Up close, it was overwhelming. The towers that had seemed graceful and distant from across the lake now soared above them like watchful giants. Windows glowed high in the dark, hundreds of them, warm and golden. Banners hung motionless from the ramparts, their colours muted in the moonlight. The scent of wax, stone and smoke drifted faintly from within. Hagrid led the way along a narrow bridge of stone toward the main gates, an immense archway carved with serpents, lions, badgers and eagles twined together. The carvings shimmered faintly when the torchlight hit them, as though alive. Rowan slowed, staring. The creatures seemed to shift in the corner of his eye, the lion's mane flickering like fire, the eagle's feathers trembling. He blinked, and they were still again. "Come on, lad," Hagrid said quietly, his lantern swinging low. At the end of the bridge stood the doors, towering slabs of oak banded with black iron, so tall that even Hagrid looked small beside them. Their surfaces were etched with runes so old they were worn almost smooth, and their handles gleamed like polished brass. Rowan could see his reflection in them, pale, wide-eyed and nervous. The castle loomed silent above, every window watching. Hagrid turned back to count them again. "All right there, everyone? Good, don't dawdle. Up you go now." Rowan took a breath and stepped forward. The moment his shoe met the stone before the door, a strange warmth brushed the air. Hagrid strode ahead of them, boots squelching on the wet stone. He raised one enormous fist and knocked. Boom! 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 The sound echoed inside the castle like distant thunder. Before anyone could say a thing, the massive doors creaked,